artists don't sell anything till they're gone. And then it sells. I mean, that's what artists are. They create what they want to because they want to, and not just to make money. That's kind of how I feel. Like, as soon as you turn your art into a job, it loses its appeal and it just feels like work. When you do it just for the joy of it, that's great. My mother taught me how to sew. She was an excellent seamstress. I was not quite as drawn to clothing sewing as I was other things. And about 15 years ago, my mother-in-law taught me how to quilt. Oh. And it just really clicked with me. It was a chance for me to put colors together that people wouldn't necessarily wear in clothing. Just seemed a little blah to me. I'm really driven by color, and to be able to put colors together in shapes, that just really excited me about the sewing. My mother-in-law was teaching me how to do applique quilting. So I made a huge stack of the same pattern for practice, and she said, okay, now you have to pick a pattern, you're ready to make a quilt. And I said, well, what about these? And she said, well, they're just all the same. I said, well, that's okay. So they were all different colors. I took all the different colors, I went to the fabric store and I bought sashing colors, and I made my first quilt. And I still have it, I love it. But the next one, I felt like I really wanted to do a pattern, learn how to follow a pattern. So I did a tumbling block quilt. And I think that taught me techniques and, just solidified for me that I can follow a pattern and make a quilt. But it just seems like I'm making somebody else's quilt. When I make the crazy patch ones that I embellish, it just feels more like that's coming right from me. I've done several pattern quilts, but I really prefer the crazy patch, just organic. Sometimes I just throw fabric in a bag and I just pull out the next piece. I don't even look at what color it is or how it would ever go together. And just let it become what it is. The biggest surprise was probably the first quilt that I made that was a definite pattern, which was tumbling block, which is very intricate, and that it actually came out looking just like the pattern. Because it was put together in a way that it didn't look like it was going to be much of anything once it got together, but as I started sewing it together, it just started to look. I just loved it. Just thought, wow, I can really do this. I would look at quilts and think they're so hard, they're so intricate, I could never do this. But then when you just start learning how, step by step, you can amaze yourself with what you can really do. Yeah, it did take me 14 months to make but boy, when I took that last stitch, I was so excited to see that wow, look at it. It's fantastic. It looks just like that. Getting what's in my head onto paper and then making sure all the measurements are going to work and cutting is just not the fun part for me. Not at all. Having it go together is the fun part, but yeah, I just like everything to just be very like whatever it's going to be. I feel like it's something in me that I need to express, but I don't really know what it is until it's done, and I think that was it. This is a lap quilt that I made, and I was just doing some embroidery. And when I got done with the butterfly, I thought, well, what am I going to do with this? It's just, I don't really want to frame it. What am I going to do? And I had some silk that sort of matched the colors, so I framed it in silk. And then I thought, well, this will be the center of my quilt. And so I made all the crazy patches and sewed them together. And then I did embroidery on every seam, just something that made it look like the embroidery was holding the pieces together, like an old-fashioned quilt might be. Embroidery is a a certain kind of thread called floss, and there are probably unlimited number of stitches that you can do. So it's these bits here, and they're all different. You can add beads like I've done here. These are French knots, a blanket stitch. I mean, there's just all kinds of different stitches. The quilting holds the back, the batting, and the top together so that the batting doesn't shift when you use the quilt or wash it. They make quilting thread. I run my needle and thread through some beeswax because it strengthens the thread. It lasts longer. And then usually you can, if you want to do it freehand, you can. I have templates and I draw the pattern on the fabric and then just a running quilting stitch. So the whole thing is quilted and embroidered. It takes a long time, but that's the fun part for me. Some people don't like that. This was a lot of work because every stitch, every seam has embroidery on it. So this probably took me, I'd say, at least 6 months. Because I do all the quilting by hand, so I don't use a quilting machine to do the quilting. So it usually, for a queen size quilt, it would take probably 14 months to do one. So it's really an investment of time. You know, you can just build the quilt and then send it out and have someone quilt it, which is a lot quicker, but I find a lot of enjoyment with the hand sewing.
So all your work is done by hand?
No, I piece things together with the machine, but I do all the embellishing by hand and I quilt by hand.
Now, was that part of why you started to move towards smaller quilts, the length of time at these?
No, I actually wanted a few lap quilts. They're nice to throw in the car and put over your legs if somebody's cold, or just sitting and reading. And I make similar size baby quilts.
Can you talk about the fabric that you have to use? Because quilting, you can't use certain types of fabric. Although maybe with this you could.
Yeah, you can. There's a quilt over there that has some silk pieces in it. You can use, I've used velvet pieces, and I backed one quilt with flannel. So you really can use most anything, but cotton works best together. I mean, there's good fabric and there's not good fabric, but if you go to a good fabric store, I would recommend that you buy fabric that isn't just printed on one side, because that's just going to wash off over time and fade, but actually dyed fabric. And good fabric stores do carry that. Some of the big box store chains carry the cheaper fabric, and it's tempting to buy it, but it doesn't last. So if you want your things to last, you do have to pay up front, but it's worth it. There's probably good thread and bad thread. It's, I suppose, trial and error, see what works best for you and how tightly you sew and that sort of thing. Once you start sewing, you always have scrap bags. And sometimes the scrap bags get big and you just need to start using up the scraps. And so that's sort of what I did. I piece the material together with a machine, and then I do the rest by hand. Yeah. And I cut the shapes one at a time, or two. I'll cut the first two shapes and just sew them together. And then I'll make another straight edge and I'll grab another piece and sew it on. I don't cut all the shapes and fit them together like a puzzle and then sew them together. They just sort of arrive at whatever they are. And then I cut the whole piece into a square. And that way I can just move my template around and see, like you might line up a shot in photography, I can just pick out how I want it to be framed. They're probably 14 by 16, or they're just all funny shapes and they're not straight edged or anything on the outside. And I cut them down to the part that I want to see in the frame. And that's where the graphic design comes in. Once I've sewn all these bits together and embroidered the embellishments on, then that's sort of where the more cerebral part comes in, where I choose how I want to frame it, which angle I want to cut it out into the square as. I could do things that were straight up and down and there wouldn't be that many diagonal pieces or triangles. I like a lot of angles. Like even the way the embroidery goes, it's sort of pushing your eye up to the next thing. It's got a lot of movement to it, and I try to show that. I think just trying to pair the purple and the teal together, and I happened to pull out just a handful of scraps, and they all happen to be similar. Most of them were similar, so I started putting them together, and then doing the embroidery in very specific colors just to reflect those two, purple and teal. It's just playing with color.
You seem to have a pretty good color theory. Is that something you picked up in school, or
Yes.
is that something that just came naturally?
Yeah, color in school. I studied color theory quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think just because I've always been, even as a child, just like I wanted the brightest color I could. I can't, imagine what it must have looked like now. But I just thought it was the greatest thing to have like red, white, and blue shiny shoes, or something like that. Just because I love the color. Very vibrant, very life-giving to me. I do a rectangular size as well, but right now I only have a couple of those. I like this size, and I like the square. Something to me is very appealing about a square, maybe because usually quilts are in square patches. This one is obviously patriotic theme. Some of it is, I wanted to sort of mix old-fashioned and new elements, so I picked fabric pretty specifically for this one. The stars are actually like rubberized stars that are on top of the fabric, so that's a pretty new kind of fabric, whereas this ticking is quite old. And I liked the red, white, and blue design that sort of started to evolve. Sometimes when I start one, I start with a middle piece, and I think I'll build on it, and then it turns into something completely different than what I had thought it might be. Mm-hmm. So this one may not have started out being a patriotic quilt piece. It could have, I saw the stars and I might have done, I just don't remember. But that happens quite a bit. I'll pick a middle piece and then suddenly it turns into something else.
Do you get inspired by a piece of fabric, or do you have a thought of what you want to try to do with that fabric? Or
Both, really, and sometimes it's just completely random. I will go up into my stash cupboard and I will pull out, without really thinking too much about it, just 8 different pieces of fabric and just start sewing them together. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily even make a shape. I just sew 2 straight edges together, make another straight edge, sew another piece on that. And I don't think too much usually about what color goes next to what color. Occasionally you'll see I have done some monochromatic pieces, so one is completely reds, one is completely yellows, but mostly it's just a mishmash of whatever color strikes me that day. Mm-hmm. I did a series of these monochromatic just to sort of play around with mostly the different shades of the same color. And then this one I just did one color of the embellishing. These are some of my favorites, the monochromatic ones. For some reason they're just like, especially when I have them together, there's a yellow, an orange, a red, a green, a blue. They look like candy in a dish to me. It just feels very satisfying.
I would find them more difficult to do because of the similarity. Mm-hmm. You like them more, but are they more difficult to do?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they're more difficult. It was just a change. It's just nice to be able to do ones that are completely random. And then I was just in the mood to do these monochromatic panels. And the more I did them, the more I liked them. And then I was sort of done with that for a while. And I really got back to just the really random, take a bag full of scraps and start pulling stuff out and see what you get.
You don't see the design coming from the fabric then?
No, not necessarily. Mostly it's very organic and it just happens the way it happens. And sometimes I sew pieces together that actually get cut off and not ever seen. So it sort of evolves on its own.
Do people bring you bags of cloth?
Yes. And actually I love that. My aunt lives out west and she decided she was a quilter. She decided to not quilt anymore. And I came home from work one day and found huge boxes full of fabric on my porch. She sent me all of her fabric. So, I go through it. Some of it I keep, some I give away. It just depends on, what I like. But I don't think I would ever throw any away. There's always somebody who likes something that doesn't really appeal to you and that's just the thing they're looking for. So I think quilters do swap material quite a bit. I think like a painter, it's something that comes out of your soul. You can express yourself and someone else finds joy in it. It's very satisfying that somebody sort of gets how you feel through your art. It does. It makes me feel great and it makes me want to continue to do it and just keep creating and it's just very relaxing for me. It's fun. I just love to see things evolve, what they're going to end up being. Sort of like raising a child. Want to see how they turn out. Color and nature. And I probably get the basic inspiration from nature, see what I have for colors, and then just sort of fine tune it into something that's sort of interpretive of what I've seen. Adding my little details, the embellishing. I think they would be less interesting without the embellishing. They would just be fabric sewn together. I think the little details add like a crack in a rock makes it more interesting than a rock. Definitely the seasons are very influential, especially in New England. They give you different feelings. You see different colors. You just get different ideas. And I do take a lot of inspiration from nature. I love the stars and the celestial look, and then flowers, and I like fabric that looks like bark. It's just all different sorts of things. Mostly I do bright colors, but once in a while, like I said, if I make something for someone, I made a quilt for my son, and he likes dark colors, and he had bark, planks of wood, river stones, and it's nice. I tend to more gravitate toward this, but I could be inspired by nature. It's not about the time for me, it's just the enjoyment. I really like old-fashioned things. I like gardening and preserving my own food and sewing things by hand, darning socks. I just like old-fashioned ways. So it just gives me a lot of enjoyment and like a sense of accomplishment that I did something with my own hands and didn't rely on a machine to do it. It's very satisfying. I really like them all. Mm-hmm. Like I said before, they're like children. They're like your babies. I just love them all. I was actually just, like I said to you earlier, there isn't room in my house for all of them, so I was thinking of starting a rotating gallery so I can see them all from time to time, but just not have them all up at once. When I started to get so many pieces, thinking, well, maybe I should display this somewhere and, not just have them in my house. But, I hadn't pursued that, but it had crossed my mind. I had thought about that, actually. I had someone suggest to me that I could take orders and do custom pieces, and where I might do that once in a while. To me, this is my art. It has to come from me. Anybody can create anything, but to me, this is my art. If people love it, that's great. That makes me happy that they understand where I got my inspiration and they can feel that. If people don't like it, it's just not their thing, and that's fine too. To me, this isn't a business. This is what I love to do. Like, I think a painter probably doesn't stand in the studio going, let's see what will sell. They want to create something that's meaningful to them without really thinking that someday they might sell it. They might, it's a very personal thing to me. So you have to satisfy your client. Mm-hmm. They're coming and looking for a certain thing, a certain result, and you have to satisfy your client. And here, I feel like I have to satisfy me. And if people like it, great. And if they don't, that's fine too. Mm-hmm. It's not going to change my expression of how, what I feel. The business part really does not appeal to me. To me, it's not a business. Mm-hmm. It's, when it starts to be a business, I think you lose the art. And it just becomes a business. I'll keep going with it like this for now. We'll see how it evolves. I really don't want to push in any direction because I feel like that's too contrived and it loses its appeal as art. If I put pressure on myself to crank out so many to do, a show or something, to me it just takes the edge off the art. My feeling isn't in the art anymore. I'm very proud of it. Since I enjoy it, I like to see it up as a group. I've gotten very positive response from people, so I know that it does touch other people in a good way. So I'm excited to have my work up at GCTV. The monochromatic ones, I really did as a series, but other people might not see that, but I sort of did that. They were very citrusy to me, with the green, yellow, orange. They looked good together to me. After I got them all done, I was sort of surprised by that. But I have thought of also doing a series and framing them in a triptych, sort of like the yellow, green, and orange ones that I did here that could go together but don't necessarily have to. Mm-hmm. Again, I think you create, especially if it's a gift, you think about the person, you might create something you think they would love, but in the bottom line is that you have to love it before you can give it away. And so that's why I don't think I could take orders for certain things, or here's a bag of fabric, now I want one out of it. Well, you can do that. This is art. This is painting with fabric. Yes, I studied graphic design years and years and years ago. Just for a couple of years, but I've always been artistic. As a child, I was always drawing and painting and creating and gluing, and I just like to create things, and I love shapes. So this is kind of a culmination of everything that I like. Everybody, I think, knows what they like visually, but when you learn the principles behind why people like a certain look, why a diagonal is a little more interesting than a straight up and down line. It's visually just brings you to another piece of the art. I think that really did help me quite a bit. I've done some drawing, I've done photography, I've done a little bit of painting. I feel like I just don't have the patience for that, and maybe I don't have the aptitude for that. Where this, I don't find frustrating in the least. It's fun from the beginning to the end. It's relaxing. I've achieved results with other art forms like drawing and painting, but it's more frustration in that whole process. I think that takes a lot longer to achieve a result for me. You need fabric and probably a sewing machine, a good pair of scissors, and thread. And that's probably all you need at first. They have some pretty good things out now. Cutting mats and rotary cutters, and they didn't have those years and years and years ago. They do help. Find somebody who does it and just ask them to see their work and talk about it, and maybe they would spend a day with you and show you a basic techniques, and then just go with it and do anything you want. There's no right or wrong. Just experiment. Just experimental books from the library, videos online of other people quilting, quilt shows. There are probably a lot of people doing very different things, and you could sort of find your niche, whether you wanted to do this kind of thing or, very old-fashioned Civil War type quilts, or you're just probably exposed to a lot more. I've seen quilts that are pieced together that look like paintings. I mean, they are of something. Mm-hmm. All these intricate little pieces of fabric put together to make a painting. I guess it depends on what sort of painting you like, whether you're like a realist or you're impressionist or, whatever. Yeah, don't be afraid to make a mistake. There really is no right and wrong, and if you can't get a technique, just find a book or a video or a person who can help you with that, and just keep learning new things. Push yourself a little bit every time. Well, initially I'd like them to just enjoy it. And it would be super if somebody was inspired to do something of their own. And I'm open to helping people get started if that's what they're wanting, or if it just sparks something in them saying, oh, I want to do that, but I want to paint instead, or I want to do a mosaic or a collage or something. Just to inspire someone else to do what is meaningful for them. Quilts have been around forever, but I think they just keep evolving with the people who create them and the times and the materials that are available. They wouldn't have probably had fabric this vibrant 200 years ago. So they worked with what they had, and they made beautiful things. We just have more available now. That's kind of how I feel. Things aren't really well made. And I just want something that I can pass down in my family that's still usable. I think handcrafting, not just in quilting, but in a lot of different arts, is really coming back.